Well, about just around lunchtime, New Year's Eve, where Rosalie and I and Cecilia were actually down to Brent Cross getting a bit of groceries and one or two other things. The rest of our family, Richard and Adrian, were both here. Richard was in the church playing the organ, Adrian was in the house. And one always hears paging going on in Brent Cross of other people, but for this time it was us, which I didn't actually hear because I think if I remember rightly, John Lewis. We were all in 3 different stores anyway, I remember that. Cecilia heard the paging of me, went to the office, discovered that there was a fire. She'd been she phoned back home, that's right, and Adrian, I think, talked to her, told her that the church hall was on fire, should get me back. So she managed to find me. We still didn't find Rosalie, so I left a message at one of the places I knew she was going in Phoenix to say I'd take the car home and I'd send Richard back to collect them, and so drove home. Well, we've become quite accustomed to people burning bits of the church down, but this did sound somewhat worse. And I could see how much worse at the point that just after I'd gone through the lights at the Burrows coming back through Hendon, there's a point on the A41 where you can get just a glimpse of the church, particularly in winter when there aren't leaves on the trees. I could see the smoke from there. So I was quite aware I was coming back to a real fire.
We were getting ready to open up the kitchen after the Christmas break. About 12:15, there seemed to be some greyness around and smelling of burning. Quite often when that happens, I often think I've got toast that I've forgotten about or something cooking that I've forgotten about. But then when it becomes more obvious and it gets greyer, then people start saying there's some smoke about, as bad as it obviously was going to get. We looked out the door and people started saying to me there's smoke and it seems to be coming from the church. And I suppose because we've suffered 2-3 fires in my time as church warden at the church, I immediately thought that was the problem. In a way, the first thing I did was jump in the car, just parked round the back and sort of drove down. But when we got to roughly the Vicar's Gate, it was impossible to go any further because it was like some huge fog had descended on the area. So leaving the car there, sort of ran through the vicarage with keys to the church in hand, went into the church without even thinking, and there it was, clear and nothing. And by that time some police were sort of following on as well, and I thought it must be the hall. And of course going round there and seeing smoke coming out of windows, again my immediate reaction with keys in hand was to go in and get a fire extinguisher and start dealing with the problem. But I hadn't looked to the roof, and the police said don't go in, and of course stood back, saw the roof, and there were the flames coming through the roof tiles, and by that time the asbestos tiles were beginning to fly off everywhere, and so there was nothing we could do but retreat. And just at that time the fire engines started to arrive and people started to build up, and like most people, my immediate reaction was sort of just upset, I suppose, to think that somebody had done this to a building that we'd been so used to. And of course at that time you couldn't begin to conceive what one would end up with. So yeah, for a few moments it was very sad and brought a tear to the eye, and really was being pulled away from the fire. So there's nothing you can do now, you know, you just got to let those that can deal with the problem deal with it.
You just couldn't believe that it was anything to do with John Keble's. But of course going up the road, the sight that, you know, came in front of your eyes, we just wanted to cry. You know, the whole setup, the fire engines, there's people, there's water, and the noise, you know, the roof and all the flames. That wasn't very nice at all. But at that time I didn't really give a thought as to what we'd lost. All you could think about was how on earth had this happened, you know, and just the shock of the whole thing.
Well, I felt just very devastated. I think I was much more concerned while it was ablaze, because I can remember standing on the corner, and a number of people from church had joined, and there were tears just streaming down my face. And I think it was just a feeling of numbness, and what on earth was going to happen. How were we going to sort of put it all together again? A feeling that I knew something good would come out of it, I'm sure, but just so very, very concerned for for everyone in the neighbourhood who used it.
Right, well, the first I heard about the fire was when somebody phoned David, somebody from Sefton Avenue, to say that the hall was on fire. I remember it New Year's Eve, and we were having a party that evening. I was upstairs doing something. I remember yelling downstairs to David, "I hope it burns down," thinking that if it did, we'd have a better chance to start off from scratch. But unfortunately, it didn't completely burn down. We were left with the walls.
What did you do when you heard of it?
Oh, I stayed at home and got on with getting ready for the party. David went off round to see what was happening. It was, from a personal point of view, it was little more than a year after we'd had a fire here at home, and even when the next day I went round to the hall to look at it, I was really quite overcome by the smell. It brought the remembrance of our own fire back again very acutely, so I didn't really want to be involved in that part of it.
Well, once you got over the initial shock and that feeling of that emotional feeling had gone, of course, then you sort of I took my normal role and started to think that first of all, the fire brigade arriving, I was able to obviously undo the doors. I wish now that I hadn't, because had they broke in, we probably would have got new doors out the fire insurance instead of having the old ones revamped, which is been a source of a problem to us, because we just haven't got the money to spend on doing any more at the moment. But I suppose I reverted to my normal role and started to organise the fire brigade and show them where the electricity boards were so they could cut off the electric and the gas and the water. And also sort of tell them of various areas. One of their problem areas, of course, which resulted in the time that they spent at the fire, was, of course, the GC's loft, where, of course, they wouldn't have known the extent of what was in there, which, of course, caused them to be there much into the evening. So there was a lot of useful things one could do. And then, of course, we actually had been sort of getting ready, as I said, to prepare for a new year in the kitchen. So we were able to bring down pots of tea and things like that to keep people going in the afternoon. And then really it was just answering questions, people, police, fire brigade, some reporters arrived, things of that nature. And trying to be of as much use as one could, really.
Well, what we're already trying to do, at the back there we've got a scout hut which is untouched. So what we hope to do is we're already looking at things like playgroups that meet here, the sort of groups that need a kitchen and that kind of thing. And also we've got dance groups meet here. We're looking at taking up, we've got a big area in church which obviously these days isn't used as much now, especially our Christmas services are over. So we might take up around about...
If there's anything you do it.
Churches, they're doing Man for All Seasons. Well, that was due to take place, and you've been running a thing on that anyway in the local. That's due to take place in church anyway. The drama group that meet here, which you well know from the paper, the Good Companions, have suffered the most because they really had quite an extensive array of costumes, all of which you can't replace because they're post-war suits, pantomime costumes, things like that. A lot of period costumes and things like that. So, and looking at it now, I personally, I don't know whether it could be, if the structure is sufficient to stay as it is, it might mean a complete rebuild, you know, which would be a great shame.
How old's that building?
Well, that was the, you've got your original church, was that builder's hut, which arrived here in about the 1926.
The green one?
That green hut. That was an old builder's hut, and it was sited on Dean's Lane there as a mark for the first church in this area. And it was from that, along with some other churches in what was then Westminster area, they built this. And this was the church and also, of course, the local community hall. And once they'd sort of established themselves as a Christian community here, they envisaged this church, which was sort of out to the mid-30s.
Well, I suppose a certain amount of oh no, not again. I mean, it was quite apparent that the building was going to be completely destroyed. I mean, it wasn't anything like we'd had the 2 fires we'd had at the church. A certain amount of distress, but I would say also from the beginning a recognition that it was to be seen as an opportunity. And I mean, in terms of the conversation I had just that afternoon with all sorts of people who were standing around, I said, well, we've got to see this as a positive way in which we'll produce something better.
I was just appalled by the state that it was in, really, and quite overcome by it. But somehow, because of personal feelings, frightened to get closely involved, I didn't actually get out of the car. I just sat in the car and watched it. But that's a personal side of things.
Well, I've been in the GCs for over 30 years, and I think my thoughts were really running along the lines of things in the wardrobe, because I have been so involved with that over the years. And it was at that point when the fire seemed to be strongest, when things in the loft really caught, and I was thinking all the time of the costumes that we had made for Aladdin, which had only happened just a few weeks before, and which I think all of us in the GCs remembered as being one of the loveliest pantomimes, one of the happiest pantomimes we'd done. And it was just 60 years of hard work and sewing going up in smoke, and of course one thought of all the stage and everything that people have done on the stage. How would we manage without it?
Well, the immediate effect was obviously a sense of distress as it became apparent that it was at least probable that it had been deliberately set. A feeling from a lot of people of, how could anybody do something like this? And it was very interesting, the large number of people who started to talk about things they'd done, sometimes really a long time ago, in the hall, which brought memories back. I mean, I remember one of the first donations we had was from a woman who'd had her wedding reception there, which was over 50 years ago, and things like that. And there was a way in which, because the hall has been a centre of many community activities, clearly this was something which was generated in the community as a whole. It wasn't just a matter of the church members, it was all sorts of people who've lived here, and especially the people who've lived here a long time.
Well, I suppose my immediate reaction was that we could house some of the things that were going on. Certainly we've used the church in the past, and realising that it was going to be out of action, and realising the need that we'd had within the community. Then, as I say, once you got into the role of thinking, right, what's going to happen next? I mean, there are immediate things like, obviously, the water and the electric for the scout hut came from the church, so there was an immediate problem. At least we needed to keep one of our buildings going, and also maybe, as we did in the end, use it for many groups. Water to the church would have been affected because that's the feed from there, and the thought of using the church. So once within a few days, I mean, I was able to sort of get those things going. Once we realised that the mains of the electric were not affected, and therefore that was able to be used for other things. And most of the groups in the beginning, we started to think that we could rehouse and keep everybody going.
Then you started to think, well, what are you going to do? This was everything we had. And I think the first thought was, where will we meet? how are we going to let everyone know? They're going to turn up and they've got this in front of their eyes. There were quite a few GCs up there, and we sort of managed to talk amongst ourselves. Then we did some phoning round, and we had a quick committee meeting. And it was decided we would carry on whatever. We would not give up. And Oliver had said to us, he'd been in touch and said we could use the church. We grabbed that because we thought, well, even if we just have the one meeting in there with everyone, then we'll decide what the general feeling is as to how we cope with all of it. And when that first meeting came, we were so surprised at the number of people that turned up, you know, that gave their support by just being there. And from then, we decided we would definitely carry on.
Well, the very first thing we did was to actually drop a note through every door in the geographical parish, which was, 3,100 houses, I think it is, saying, you're probably aware that our church hall burnt down on New Year's Eve. Although it's well covered by insurance, in order to rebuild it and improve it, we're going to inject some money that we've raised locally. Would you feel like helping? And that produced a really very considerable response. And some of it in quite small amounts, but there were lots of £5, £10 donations. But of course, you know, for a large number of people, they rapidly accumulate. And some really very substantial donations from people that probably would not have come forward but for that. And it certainly meant that within 3 or 4 weeks of the fire, we could definitely see that money was coming in on quite a scale. And there was a period, I suppose, of something like 6 or 8 weeks after that, in which there was never a single day that went by in which some money came in. So some days it was several hundred, and some days it was £10 or £15. But it was good to see every single day something came through the vicarage door, either in the mail or dropped through the door by somebody on foot.
Fundraising was one of the main items that we then had to start thinking about. Would we do any productions? Could we do any productions? Again, Oliver said, yes, you can use the church. We weren't sure how that was going to work at all. But no matter what, we were going to continue. And I think the fighting spirit came out. And also, I think it brought us closer together. You know, you've got this common cause. And no matter what, you're going to keep going. I mean, with 60 years coming up, we just weren't going to give in.
Well, first of all, the target was 25,000. That was over-optimistically set, really by the architect, before we had any real idea how much was going to come from the insurance and what the constraints were going to be on the insurance. That didn't emerge until a good while later. And then, I can't remember when, but perhaps 6 months later, it was revised to 35,000, and the members of the fundraising committee, who were also members of the whole building committee, then suggested that 35,000 would be a more realistic target. In the event, we've exceeded that total, and so have the bills exceeded that total. So, you know, perhaps it's as well, but, you know, 40,000 would have been perhaps more realistic, but I don't think more than that.
Because the marathon, the Shakespeare marathon, was the biggest one we did, the first one. That was quite something. I was there for the start, and then I had to go. That was about 10 o'clock we started, and then I went back at 6 o'clock in the morning. I then visited in the afternoon, and then I was back there at 10 o'clock for the finish. So I was there for a good deal of the time, and I managed to take some photos of the people doing their little bits. And I found people were very cheerful with it. They were interested in what they were reading. They didn't realise Shakespeare could perhaps be so much fun. And the time went quickly. I didn't think it would personally. I thought, well, perhaps it's going to be a bit of a drag, especially as it was over the 24 hours. But it went very quickly, and as I say, people did enjoy it.
Because I won the wager, though you hit the
Then,
white, and being a winner, God give you good night.
Now go thy ways, thou hast tamed the cursed shrew.
'Tis a wonder, by your leave, she will be tamed so. Where is the life I live? Where is it gone? Gone?
Sorry about all this.
Elizabeth.
We sat down and poured in initially a number of ideas, and we had some key, quite large ideas, which were a quarter marathon fairly quickly, which caught a lot of people's imagination, and that raised well over £1,000. And another key idea which came in was the Craft and Flower Festival, which exceeded all our expectations and drew in so many people to come into the church. It really was a great event in every sense of the word. And we always knew that the fair in the following autumn would raise at least £6,000. So we had these large key events, and in between them we slotted the things that people offered to do, trying not to get more than one a month, although that was very, very difficult sometimes.
Parade Sunday, and most of them will be there. No, not particularly.
Yeah, come on, Chris. Come on, you've got to stand and cheer.
Oh, right, stand and cheer, right. We've got to cheer you.
And the next one. And the next runner.
Oh, and the next one. The next runner's only doing one. We've got to cheer the next runner. Well done.
Come on. Come on.
You only want 2 or 3 in a flower. These are not real flowers. These are just what I call a fairy tale. And you should always put an odd number of stamens in a flower. Evidently, so I'm told, if you went round and counted them, they never have an even number.
See you later. You're coming round to my house.
Yes, she likes the family roses. Green roses.
not have to be level, because you'd be surprised
How much
it takes up. Yes, that's okay. Well, that's a bit too much, but it doesn't matter really. We're going give it a yank through. Just a bit. Good.
Oh, there's something to do with yours as well.
You want to shout boo, John? Boo.
Mrs. Jones, can you just move a bit?
As church wardens, along with the incumbent, we're totally responsible for anything that goes on within, as I call it, the complex, i.e. the church and the hall and other buildings, and indeed any properties we've got. So immediately, obviously, the responsibility fell on Peter White and myself and the vicar as far as signing contracts were concerned, and also dealing with the architect. There must have been many people who would have liked to have dealt with the architect on an individual basis, but obviously they couldn't. And in some ways one became a bit of a ping-pong ball, because you had obviously to make sure that people were being represented in the right way. So you had to listen to their views and pass them on. And then sometimes you received the answers from the architect and had to hand them back, and they might not be happy about that. So really, as a church warden, it was a difficult job from most of the things that I've done in the past, because you were trying to satisfy so many groups. Every group had their own little niche in the hall, and they wanted to make sure that they were getting it back, or at least something better. And some of them felt, I think, because they possibly paid less, they might not get as much as somebody who obviously used the hall a great deal more. And again, you spent a lot of time reassuring them that this wasn't the case, and we were listening to everybody.
And then the other person who was absolutely crucial to the entire process was not a parishioner, but Simon Reed, the architect. Until the fire, I didn't know Simon terribly well. I mean, he's the present main active partner in the Gordon Spence partnership, but Gordon Spence, who's now substantially retired, who still does some associate work, was the person who I had known principally, and who'd been our church architect for a number of years, and who'd been responsible for the work following the 2 previous fires in the church. But I'd had some encounters with Simon, but hadn't had to do any substantial work with him. I phoned him up about, I think, 10 or quarter past 9 on the morning of the 2nd of January, not quite sure whether he'd necessarily be in his office. A lot of people tried to take right off till after the weekend, after New Year. But no, he was there, and I explained the situation. He said, well, there's nothing here, I can't leave. And in 20 minutes' time, he'd arrived from Radlett. And he was here all morning, back again with adjusters in the afternoon, and the way he began was the way he continued. He'd given a tremendous amount of time, and was very good at knowing how to proceed, how to negotiate with insurers, as well as the actual building matters, and very good at getting us to look at what we wanted, provide us with options to look at. At an early stage, we had several different kinds of plans, and gave an awful lot of time to meeting with the PCC and with the building committee, often quite late into the night. So it was a matter of rapidly getting the right kinds of people with whom to share things. And I think the success of the venture is the fact that there were all these different people involved, using their particular abilities in the different kinds of ways.
I think that we ended up with nothing, and I think in 18 months we've got a building now which I consider to be a very beautiful building. Church halls sort of give a picture of really sort of a dirty place, you know, not very well looked after. I like to think of what we've got now as a premises, really, a centre. Given the time, we could be more, with the building we've got back, given the time, we could give more of a service to the community by doing lunch clubs, by offering some community help during the week, because the building now lends itself much more to that type of thing for the community. I think it also showed that a lot of people could work together in fellowship throughout the time, and that's good for people to get that working together and in fellowship. So I think really that if nothing else, it proved that we can still get together and do something useful and raise money and end up with a very nice product that really is a showpiece to people.
Take a small glance and go along.
The person I want to begin with is the one who has done so much to fire us all with enthusiasm in the immense task of fundraising for the hall. There's been a very good fundraising committee, and the person who's been the chairman of that, as many of you know, is Chris Norman, who has done a totally tremendous job at a time that she's actually had some very considerable health problems. She's just recently, in the past few weeks, had a serious operation in hospital. It's wonderful that she's with us here today, even though because of being just recently out of hospital, she's here in a wheelchair. But she's done so much, has given so much time, has been such a pillar of enthusiasm and efficiency in relation to the minutest of details. And the fact that she's been in considerable pain much of the period that she's been involved with the fundraising has been an added reason for everybody else to be fired with enthusiasm by her. So I want to begin with those words of great thanks to Chris, and I believe there is something to be presented to her. I'm sorry, Simon, that you didn't manage to get here for all the really kind things I've said about you, every one of which was true. And we have a small token of our appreciation, which George Ramsey will give you. And you'll see exactly why I call it that after you open it up.
Thank you very much
Reverend Osmond, Archdeacon, ladies and gentlemen, it is a very real pleasure for my wife and I to be here today. I say that because some 13 years ago, when we were deputies, we came to John Keble to listen to the Barnet Orchestra at Hendon, which always gave me much amusement because it invariably played at Edgware. But I was touched on a number of occasions that we came, not just for that, but for other things, by the importance of John Keble to the spiritual, social, and cultural needs of this area. And therefore it is, you know, it was with great sadness that I heard of the destruction and the damage that had been caused. I'd like to just add my own congratulations to everyone who has been involved in so speedily restoring this building and in restoring the use for the spiritual needs and for the cultural and social needs of this area. And it is for those reasons that I'm delighted to be here. Now, I believe, Mr. Osmond, that I will soon cut the ribbon, but there's nothing else you want me to do at the moment. So, once again, lovely to see you. I hope to meet you all a bit later on. Thank you very much. It gives me the greatest possible pleasure to declare this building well and truly opened. You were obviously aware of my shortcomings. You've given me a key that I can't lose. Thank you very much.
That was the original foundation stone, but we actually demolished the wall it was in, so we moved it.
Because I'm there, can I have a picture of you with the plaque, please? Is that all right? Wonderful. Can we have your good lady in as well? Why not? Why not? All your quarters. I'd like you to look at me though. That's all right. Yes, that's good. Thank you very much indeed.
No, I think one of them, which I should have said, this building is very distinctive and used to be very much a landmark in the area, apart from the other things which I said.
This was our major improvement, was to put multiple modern toilets. You don't need to necessarily go and examine them all, although the next one is, since a certain amount of borough money has gone into that one, that's the disabled toilet. We had a generous grant from the
That's super. This is lovely.
What a lovely room.
This is refurbished. Yes.
This is a lovely room.
That's new, but this was an existing room which we changed very considerably, including the way its entrance happens. That infield used to be absolutely terrible.
Very nice. Very nice.
I must confess, I used very much to dislike this room. It always seemed to be quite awkward. We managed to get it so that it's very good shape.
We go round.
This is just a corridor to serve the back.
Yes.
Let's have a look whilst we're down.
We have the stage, which actually we really should have had the lights on the stage, but it is quite magnificently equipped.
Well, that's because
What a lovely room. Lovely.
you'll be able to find so many different things here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And this is fundamentally as it existed before the fire.
It's got a delay. Oh, absolutely.
Well, I'm very...
I think the lighting board is a big plus. It was an old lighting board. It was a good lighting board, but it was old. And eventually we would have had to have replaced it. Now we've got just a portable one that hardly takes up any room, and that was a big plus. The planners have kindly put in another hatch at the back of the hall, so we can have 2 floodlights, because it was a bit cramped with just one. That is a plus. We've managed to get a grant for the loop system for our audience, so that if people are deaf, they can tune in to the loop system, which helps. It does help the audience, because sometimes they, oh, can I have a seat near the front because I can't hear? Well, now it doesn't matter, because with the loop system they can just tune into it.
We'd had break-ins in the hall before, nothing serious, because there was never really much to take. I think, and I still now feel very uneasy about security when it's your responsibility to look after the premises. We've always been very lucky, I think, at our church. We're one of the very few churches in the Edmonton area that always had an open door. You could say right from early morning till late in the evening. And when we suffered a couple of problems in there with fire, we thought seriously about locking the door. But we continued to leave it open except for a few hours in the afternoon. I was really... It was heartbreaking to see the hall, and as it was on that particular New Year's Eve. And I think more that somebody could actually cause so much damage that you would eventually spend best part of 18 months trying to clear up and spend an awful lot of money doing, and cause so much hardship to people. I think it's made me very conscious of the world we live in today, where people can actually destroy or harm people's property in the way they do, which without much heart searching themselves, in a very cold way perhaps. And it now makes me feel very cautious about whether we should ever open our building in the way we've done in the past, either the hall or the church, because we have spent a lot of time putting things right. And I think that you've really got to, whether you want to or not, protect what you've got. And the only way to seem to be able to do it these days is to lock it up, which obviously means people miss out, that somebody can't walk into our church as and when they want. And I think that's a great shame. But I think any discussion in the future as to whether we would reopen the church for any length of period, I would feel very doubtful about.
Well, I think it actually says something to us about what lies at the very heart of the Christian faith. That, I mean, the central events of the Christian faith are the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which obviously says something specific to him, but I think also says something general to us about the way in which good and triumph can come out of suffering and adversity. And it's quite helpful to us, I think, to be able to relate, that pair of events which is at the very heart of our faith to our everyday experience. This is one example of it, but we also face examples of that in our own personal lives. All sorts of things do go wrong in our lives, but often out of the things that go wrong, we can actually find something positive emerging out of them. And sometimes positive things that we never would have discovered if it hadn't been for the suffering and the adversity. I suppose there's even a way in which one could say that the fact that many of us knew that the experience of the Norman family, of their having had their house similarly gutted and able to get it eventually back and be able to be a good house to live in again, reminded us that it was possible for it to happen in the hall. And that was certainly one reason why the decision got made to ask Chris to chair the fundraising committee, because she knew that she had the personal example to give.
We did our pantomime early that year, and it was such a good pantomime that if we had done it in the February, or arranged to have done it in the February, a lot of it would have gone to waste. But we did have that, and we've got that to look back on, and the memories of that were very good. And I think that
Yes,
They all say,
interesting.
oh, thank goodness we did Aladdin in December and not February.
Yeah.